Good morning, everyone. We are going to spend our morning on our first walkthrough of H66, family medical leave insurance. We'll be spending quite a bit of time on that over the next 2 weeks. And then we're going to touch back in with an updated Ed Fund outlook before lunch. And then some more fun with sports wagering in the afternoon. We're going to hear from both some commissioners from other states and some of the operators who are hoping to do business in Vermont. And then after the floor, we're going to come back here and talk about driver's license suspensions. Questions, announcements, thoughts? Okay. With that, Representative Chestnut Tangerman, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us about H66.
For the record, Representative Robin Chestnut Tangerman, of all of the things that you mentioned, Chair, that you're talking about, this sounds like the most fun. And in my introduction, I'm going to cover a few things. Damien will be doing the structure, the mechanisms, the walkthrough, the details. I'm certainly happy to answer questions when I'm done, but I'm not planning on giving you the breakdown of how the bill works, leaving that to Damien. But I wanted to begin with one thing that the pandemic has highlighted beyond question is the difficulty that so many Vermonters faced choosing between work and family when they're confronted with a serious illness or an injury, either their own or a family member's. And far too often the burden falls on women who disproportionately take time off to be caregivers and then are unable or unwilling for various reasons to re-enter the workforce, which is a loss both to their family in lost income and to the workforce, to the state in general. Or maybe the breadwinner in the family is injured but doesn't qualify for leave, unpaid leave under the existing Family and Medical Leave Act. Or a child is welcomed into the world, but the parents or parent simply can't afford to take time off to recover from the birth of the child. Every situation is unique, every story is unique, but they all have one thing in common, which is it didn't need to be this hard. And that's where this bill originates. Paid family and medical leave is critical to working Vermonters for so many reasons, but it's also critical to employers and to our state as a whole. We hear from employers over and over the difficulty of keeping and finding employees, the hardship caused by high turnover, that every employee who doesn't come back is a loss of experience, institutional memory, and continuity, and especially in a time of record unemployment. And we also hear that study after study shows that people who have time and space to heal, to grieve, to deal effectively with illness and trauma are happier, healthier, more productive, and more likely to stay in their work long term. And same scholarship reinforces what parental instinct already tells us, that a child who is loved and cared for and bonded to parents thrives. And thriving children, thriving parents, thriving workers are the core of a thriving society. Not putting too much weight on this bill here. And the implications of the program go far beyond happy babies. Testimony in the Housing Committee tells us that eviction and homelessness often comes from one event where you fail to be able to make a rent payment. It could be choosing between fixing your car to get to work or paying rent, or it could frequently be the effects of a debilitating illness, injury, taking time off to care for a family member, and you get behind that one rent payment and can't make it up. We hear that the majority of evictions are for less than $3,000 in overdue rent. Would also help with that. As the Housing and General Committee worked on this bill, we kept several guiding principles in mind. One it should be accessible to all working Vermonters. 2, it should expand beyond traditional definitions of illness and injury to include bereavement and safe leave, and those are spelled out in detail. And it should expand the definition of family to reflect the complicated reality that we have rather than just our ideal scenario of family. And 3, it must be balanced between an affordable cost and a viable benefit, and not simply create a new category of the underinsured. And this bill does do all of that. Our committee made a couple of key changes from the original as presented. One is reorganizing the bill. And the way that we reorganized it is to start with the existing Family Medical Leave Act and build on that as the foundation, job protection, by adding safe leave to that without changing other conditions of the bill. And it's initially it would be unpaid safe leave, as the rest of the bill is unpaid. But it expands the definition and brings people into the fold. And then over time, it adds the contributions and the benefits, but building on that framework. And we chose to do that just as sort of a logical, the building block of the progression. The second thing we did is that the bill as presented included a rebate or refund, but not a rebund, to workers or families earning under $25,000 a year. And the reason we cut that was not because we were fundamentally opposed to it, but because we couldn't find a workable mechanism for that contribution to work. In 2021, there were almost 92,000 tax filings under $25,000. So it's a significant portion of the working population in Vermont, a depressingly large portion.
Sorry, what was that number, Rob?
92,000. But under the numbers that we were working, yes.
I'm sorry, Robin. We've talked about that 92,000 before in here, and what change did you make in the bill on that account?
So the bill as written included a refund of premiums paid by workers earning under $25,000 a year.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And we removed that refund because under the numbers that we're working with, which is a 0.5% payroll tax split between employer and employee, an employee's contribution at $25,000 a year would be $67.50. And
A year?
a year.
Oh.
And it costs more to calculate, process, and refund that than the contribution is.
All right, I understand.
My understanding is in my communications with the chair, it was a fairly messy mechanism that was in the original bill, and the committee felt like it was better for us to play with messy tax mechanisms than for them to play with messy tax mechanisms.
That was the next line.
Oh, great.
Yep. That's why we took it out. Maybe you can find a mechanism that works. And then the other thing that I said was just as an example of the amounts we're talking, that contribution or the withholding of $67.50 a year for a worker at $25,000. And that's my quick outline of the bill. As I said, I'm leaving the mechanisms and structures entirely to Damien, but happy to answer questions if you have any.
I'm curious to hear, was there any testimony that actually, Representative Maslin, go ahead. Okay. Is there any testimony that you all heard that was particularly compelling, or any testimony that you didn't hear that you think would be helpful for us to have in? And can I guess the reason I'm asking is because I don't imagine that we're going to have in sort of the whole array of folks who would benefit from a program like this, because that's sort of
Right.
more a policy committee's jurisdiction, but I also want to make sure that we're sort of bringing in those voices a little bit as we're framing our thoughts on this.
We heard very compelling stories from individuals who, had this been in place, could have avoided that snowball effect. That was really my takeaway, is that it's so often there's a small and preventable trigger that leads to poverty, eviction, homelessness, childhood trauma. And it's so often, as I said, a missed rent payment, something like that. And this, obviously this is not about missed rent payments, but it's about enabling people to get through that that difficult period, a qualifying event, as we say personally, but there's always a human story behind it. The other thing I think that I want to stress is looking at the experience of other states. And what was striking was California is in the process of raising their benefit from 60% of weekly income to 90% of weekly income. And that's because at 60%, people could not afford to use it. 60%, if you're earning $600 a week and you get 60% of that, you can't take the time off, even though it's there. So a benefit that actually enables people to use the program, I think is really critical.
Representative Maslin?
Yeah, just compliment you on your one sentence and all the others too, but everybody's story is different, but there's one commonality to them. I mean, that's true. So anybody facing whatever situation they have, there's a commonality, which is they just can't make things work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me in. And I'm going to stay and listen to some of this again.
Damian, you're welcome to take the chair. So at 9:30, I didn't highlight this in my initial agenda run through here. At 9:30, we're going to have a lockdown drill. So Robin, perhaps you'll stay with us for that really fun experience. And Damian, there's going to be an alarm. So I don't know if you've thought about 15 minutes of, rather than us just sort of stopping halfway through, maybe you could give us really big picture about structure and stuff, and then.
I'll do that. And
Okay. And then the live feed will stop when the drill starts, so that Saoirse can focus on the drill, and so that the public doesn't have to watch whatever's going to happen.
understood.
Yes.
I think that's probably a good idea. So for the record, my name is Damian Leonard. I'm from the Office of Legislative Counsel. What I'll do is I'll give you a really high level overview of the bill itself. And I'll save the program, which I think is where most of your attention is going to be focused, for after our lockdown drill. So I'm going to pull the bill up and share my screen and get started once it pops up behind me. Great. Okay, so I've pulled up the bill as voted out of House General. So as Representative Chestnut Tantrum mentioned, the first 4 sections of the bill are really adjusting the existing unpaid leave law. So in section 1, what's happening, most of what's happening is that we're adding safe leave to the bill. So you may have noticed here that I've struck through a whole bunch of language and added the word "a person" who, and that's because we define a person to include any legal entity. So rather than listing off every legal entity we can think of, we can just say a person, and it saves everyone difficulty. But anyway, the big change is that we're adding safe leave. A lot of the definitions that you see above relating to domestic violence or domestic partner and then domestic violence relate to either adding safe leave or clarifying what we mean when we say family member. And that's the other major expansion here, is that the definition of family member has been expanded. So again, employee, we've added language for safe leave. So the requirements for someone to qualify for safe leave, which is leave that you take if you're a victim or alleged victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking, the qualifications are lower. Instead of having to work for a year at an average of 30 hours a week, you only have to work for 6 months at an average of 20 hours a week to have your job protected if you need to take safe leave.
Tammy, can you just like 4 sentences on what sort of existing unpaid leave law is?
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's go back. So existing unpaid leave law. The unpaid leave law we're adjusting is called the Vermont Parental and Family Leave Act. Most of you have probably heard of the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act. Essentially the same thing. They give you leave if you have had a child or adopted a child, if you yourself are ill or injured, or seriously ill or injured, or if a family member is seriously ill or injured and you need to take care of them. This is not sick leave. So if you have the flu, you take sick leave. If you have cancer, back surgery, car accident, that's family and medical leave, parental and family leave. It covers more serious illnesses, illnesses that could be life-threatening, that require a long-term ongoing treatment under the guidance of a healthcare provider, that may require extensive rehabilitation. It's designed for those events that 5 days of sick leave don't cover. Importantly, it's not paid. If you take it, unless your employer provides some sort of short-term disability policy, you can use your accrued paid leave, but once that runs out, it's unpaid leave. So that's what our current law provides. The main difference between our law and the federal law is the federal law starts at employers with 50 or more employees. There are very few of those in Vermont. Our law starts at 10 or more for parental leave.
And when did that pass?
Our law passed in 1991. The federal law passed in 1993. So they're both relatively recent. Our law predates the federal law, and so some of the terminology is not as well developed as it was in the federal law. And some of what we're going to be talking about here are changes we've made to bring us into line with the federal law. So 10 or more employees, and it's important to note that those are employees who work an average of 30 hours a week. So if you run an ice cream stand and you have 10 employees who work 15 hours every week, you're not covered. But if you run a small manufacturing operation and you have 10 full-time employees, you are covered. And then for family and medical leave, it's 15 or more employees working that average of 30 hours a week. So we still see under the current law that more than 78 or 80% of Vermont employers are not covered by these requirements under current law. And that wouldn't change with the addition of safe leave. Safe leave still applies to that 10 or more category. And so that's the initial change here. The next change you see is the change over to serious health condition from serious illness. What we've had heard in the general committee is that there's been a lot of confusion over what a serious illness is. For example, does it include injuries suffered? And one witness told a story of an assault that their child suffered, and then the employer questioned whether it was a serious illness under the law. So this is clarifying it and broadening it. And then parental leave. Interestingly, the original language was inconsistent. It included the employee's pregnancy in one spot, but not another. So we've clarified that. So if a doctor orders bed rest at the end of a pregnancy, that's covered. Recovery from childbirth or miscarriage was never included in the original law, so that's added. And then the birth of the child, and then to clarify again, leave to care for or bond with the child within 1 year after birth, which was mentioned in one spot but not another. So a lot of this is clarifying. One of the other changes here is we've added foster care placements, and then we've expanded adoption to children under 18 years of age instead of under 16. I can't tell you why they settled on 16, but that's been in the law since 91. The next big change is the addition of this definition of family member. You're going to see this throughout the bill, so I'm going to spend a little time on it now. The current law defines family as, if we go back up here, as a child, stepchild, a ward who lives with the employee, a foster child, a parent, a spouse, or a parent of the employee's spouse. The new definition adds in, clarifies that it's a child regardless of age, whether they're biological, adopted, or foster, a stepchild or a legal ward, a child of the employee's spouse or partner, a child for whom the employee stands in loco parentis, which means in place of a parent. So this could be anything from a grandparent who steps in while the parent is unavailable because they're ill, they're recovering from an illness, they might be incarcerated, anything like that, but they haven't had time to go through the legal process of being named a legal guardian or adopting a child. And this is already covered under the federal law, so Vermont was inconsistent with the federal law here. And then it includes an individual that the employee stood in place of a parent for later. The next paragraph is identical to the existing law, but then we start adding in the person who is a legal guardian for the employee or the employee's spouse, or who is a legal guardian of the employee or the employee's spouse, or a person who stands in place of a parent for the employee or stood in place of a parent for them when they were under 18. And this takes into account situations where someone may get married and then become incapacitated and have a guardian appointed that is not their spouse. And trying to cover the universe here.
Thanks. Very good so far. The in loco parentis issue, is that likely to, what's the likelihood, maybe that's the way to phrase it, of someone challenging or trying to mess with the definition?
That's been an established definition in the federal law for about 30 years now. So the reason the committee went with that language was to piggyback on the federal law, which has a history of regulations and interpretations kind of filling that out.
That helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. So new things that are added here in sub D, grandparents, grandchildren, and siblings. And then sub E is, and this generated probably the most discussion upstairs, is an individual with whom the employee has a significant personal bond that is or is like a family relationship, regardless of the biological or legal relationship, under the totality of the circumstances, and then including things like evidence of shared financial responsibility, responsibility for each other's well-being, an expectation of care created by the relationship or prior provision of care, cohabitation for a period of at least 6 months or geographic proximity, and other similar evidence. So this is getting at the issue of a person's chosen or chosen family. So what the committee received testimony on is from members of the LGBTQ plus community, talking about how a lot of times their chosen families don't fit within some of these structures, and then also discussions about, for example, one of the things the committee discussed a lot was that issue of an elderly neighbor that doesn't have any family. And over the years, you've developed a relationship of care. You're their healthcare power of attorney. You help with their finances. And it would be important potentially if they get incapacitated that you be able to take the lead because there's no one else. So those are the two instances they talked about. But the first instance was, and I don't want to speak for the committee, but from the committee's testimony, that seemed to be the one that really carried the day, was this issue of having families in Vermont where the definitions in A through D don't necessarily fit their situation and not wanting to leave them behind. It's worth noting too, Vermont would be the second state to bring that definition into law. So Colorado was the first to do it in their paid family leave program. Healthcare provider was updated because the old Vermont language required a physician. Many Vermonters no longer see a physician as their primary care provider. It also left out Christian Scientists who see a Christian Science practitioner, not a licensed healthcare provider. So there were both issues of recognizing that healthcare has changed in 30 years and also recognizing that some folks' religious beliefs dictate that they see a practitioner from their own religion. This also covers healthcare providers overseas if the family member or individual is injured overseas. So if you're traveling and you get injured, it's an individual who's licensed to practice in that country would qualify. And this is kept consistent with the federal regulations. So anytime the feds update their definitions, Vermont would follow with this. Safe leave, and I think this is going to be the final thing I can address, is just so you can understand it. So it's leave because the employee or the employee's family member is a victim or alleged victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. And the leave is being used to seek or obtain medical care, counseling, social or legal services, either for the employee or their family member, to recover from injuries, to participate in safety planning, to relocate or secure safe housing, or to meet with a state's attorney or law enforcement officer. And then importantly, that the employee is not the perpetrator or alleged perpetrator of the domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. So this is recognizing that these instances, it's often a close personal family member who's the alleged perpetrator. And so the protection is for someone who's not the alleged perpetrator, so you don't have an instance where the alleged perpetrator is allowed to request child protective leave related to the alleged crime that they allegedly committed. So, and then the serious health condition language was updated to reflect the federal regulations with the addition of clarifying that rehabilitation is included. That's included if you look deeply under the federal regulations, but it's not very clear. So the committee made the choice to state it clearly, including treatment for substance use disorder.
You mean explicit when you say clear?
Yes, stated explicitly. Yeah. And that was, the idea was that people wouldn't have to go into the federal regulations and read it densely, and I would describe it as challengingly written regulation to try to figure out if their condition is covered. And with respect to substance use disorder, it's important to note that this is coverage for treatment. This does not cover absences that relate to ongoing substance use. So, and that brings us to the end of that.
I think that's
I'm like waiting for this alarm to go.
It's a great time to pause. Thank you.
Yeah.
And, oh yeah, do you have a?
Yeah, I have a question on one of the definitions.
Sure.
And I know I came in late, but I doubt if anybody's asked, but
Appreciate that about you.
the definition of domestic partner refers to election law.
It does.
And that definition implies that the person is a candidate. And that seems, there ought to be a definition of domestic partner that does not reference election law.
So I'm gonna
If you,
stop sharing my screen here to pull it up. So.
It says like a person who is related to the candidate and it refers to the candidate and
Yeah,
so
I can
only
look,
candidates can be domestic partners or.
I can look in our domestic relations law to see if there's a better, definition.
They all seem to refer to that one.
Yeah, and the alternative, really is just to spell it out without using the word a candidate. And I think the reason why we've gone to that is because it historically has been something that all of you are familiar with. And so it's a definition that folks are familiar with and comfortable with. The implication when you say it, it means this has the same meaning as in 17 VSA 2414 is that the understanding is that instead of candidate, you're using employee or something like that, but we could very easily just spell it out so it's crystal clear.
I think it would be better and then future uses could refer to the new definition that doesn't.
Yeah, and
have
say
that
the
pickup.
individual
Yeah.
instead of that. Yeah, we can do that very easily.
Representative Messlin.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. It's a good question. I guess what ought to be clear from the legislation is that layperson reads it.
And we're done with your sentence.
Layperson reads